Today I wanted to talk about creative block. I've come up with a framework to talk about it, and I'm going to be looking at the reasons why I think we get into these kind of states and some solutions that I use all the time in order to remain creative and to start new work and come up with new ideas. So I'm going to talk about books that I look at that help me, cards like oblique strategies, and my own pivot cards that I made to help start work and to help with my creativity, and all sorts of techniques and ideas for starting work and remaining creative and breaking out of these creative block issues. I've even made a free version of my pivot cards, just a PDF. You can download your own free version, which you can cut out and make your own mini pivot cards. And I'll actually go through and make these mini pivot cards later on in the video. I recently made a video all about finishing music and all the techniques that I've put together over the years to finish music. And this one really is similar, and it's about starting music and how to begin the creative process. There are loads of videos on YouTube about creative block. Lots of people talk about it in different ways. This is a type of thing that you can hear from many different perspectives. You're going to have to excuse me today because I'm recovering from quite a nasty virus, which actually turned out to be COVID. The first time that I've actually had COVID. So yeah, I'm just recovering from that. So I'm a bit full of cold symptoms. Okay, so usual disclaimers here. I'm not a productivity expert or an expert in creative block and how to get out of it. This is just my experience again. Of the things that I've learned and the things that have helped me as a freelance designer and developer over the last 20 years. It's helped me to read quite a lot of books on productivity and these types of things. So some of this probably comes from that knowledge. It's not my intention to provide a solid framework that works for everybody, every type of person. Everyone's different types of creative work, different types of problems. It's very complicated, and why a certain person would be suffering with these issues. This is just my experience, and there might be something you can take from this. To sum that up, I'll be talking about this book later, this Rick Rubin's book, which a lot of people like and I like. I think it's a great book on creativity. The Creative Act, A Way of Being, Rick Rubin. And in his intro, this sums it up. Nothing in this book is known to be true. It's a reflection on what I've noticed. Some ideas may resonate, others may not. Use what's useful and let go of the rest. That's what I'm saying here. Use anything that's useful and just let go of things that don't work. I'm not sure how well this will hold together, but we'll give it a try. Okay, so your creative block, you're blocked in some way. And I've got this short list of kind of bad states of mind. They're well-known things. You see a lot of videos on these on YouTube. There's tons of videos on these things. I think these are the main problems that cause issues for me, this type of thinking. And so I'm just going to go through them quickly, and then from my own point of view, describe how they come up for me and why they come up for me. So, comparison, perfectionism, procrastination, and option paralysis. Bad ways of thinking. And these have all caused me issues and have led to this kind of state of mind. So I'll just quickly go through them, and then I'll talk about the main reasons I see that they come up for me, these types of things. So comparison. So I think we all compare ourselves to other people. You compare, if you're, from my point of view as a musician, you're going to compare yourself to other musicians. you're going to compare your music to music that you like. And you're also going to compare yourself to anybody else you come across who's trying to do a similar thing on the internet, social media, people you meet in real life. You're always going to compare yourself to other people. But it's a terrible thing to do, really, because you can't really compare yourself to other people because you're not in the same place as them. So this can lead you into quite a lot of trouble. The only positive way to compare is with yourself. So if you compare yourself with a previous version of yourself, so okay, you can look at your work now and you can say 2 months ago this was my work, this is my work now, look, it's got better, or I've learnt this thing. So comparing with yourself maybe is okay, but comparing with anybody else is pointless, really, because they may have been working for much longer than you, may have had different opportunities. So that's the first one. Perfectionism. So I talked about this in my video on finishing music, is that perfectionism was a big problem for me finishing music. I'll link to that up there. Perfectionism means that you never finish anything, but in the same way, it means that you don't get very far with things. So it's a problem with the initial stages of work as well, is that if you're expecting things to be brilliant straight off, then you're going to close things down too quickly, and you're going to, that's no good, and you're never going to get very far in a process of creating things if you're already thinking that it needs to be a certain way. Procrastination. So if it starts to not be fun, if it starts to be hard, then you're going to procrastinate and you're going to find other things to do instead. And then the final thing that I've put in is that you've got too many options to start. So you're comparing yourself to other people unfairly who have had long music careers and have spent a lot of time learning their craft. And that leads to you not getting very far with your work, always wanting it to be better, never happy with what you're doing. Becomes hard, so you're going off and you're doing other things instead, and you just don't know where to start because you've got too many options anyway. So this is the kind of setup, I think, that leads to this state of mind. Right, so let's talk about things that are not helpful that lead to these. So I've come up with a few ideas. So first off, you haven't got enough time. For many years, I used to just have an hour or so after work to start making music, and it's not a lot of time, and in that time you might not get a lot done, and also it might not be very good quality time because it might be the end of a day. You might enjoy it, but you might not. You might be tired, and so your progress is going to be slow because you can't spend all your time doing it. You're not going to get better, as quickly as you'd like, and you're not going to get as good as people that you're comparing yourself to very quickly because you haven't got a lot of time. You just an hour a day, or whatever you can manage to put together. So that's not enough time. Next problem that leads to these, next issue, is social media. For me, social media can sometimes be quite a big problem. Social media is not reality, so it's a filtered reality. If you're starting out and you haven't got a lot of time, the last place you really want to hang out is social media, because there are people showing their success and you're going to compare yourself to that. And I've had a lot of problems with that, seeing people releasing music, having success with sales with their music, winning awards, getting funding. Like, you're just bombarded with success on social media. And it's very hard, I think, and plays into some of these areas. It has done for me. Not many people post how hard their struggle is. Okay, some people might, but the vast majority of people posting on Instagram or even on SoundCloud, people are mainly putting up the things that are successful. And so it plays into these problems, comparison and perfectionism. And I think it's advisable to be very careful with social media if you are trying to spend some time being creative and we'll talk about how you can do that in a bit, and the things that I've done. So you've not got a lot of time. Social media is making you feel inadequate, and social media of various kinds is leading to gear acquisition syndrome. This has been a big problem for me over the years. There is so much great gear out there, and I think social media, whether that's YouTube, whether it's Instagram, you're looking at all these people that are doing well, and they've got lots of gear as well. They've got lots of really nice gear. And you find out what they've got and you think, oh, like if I had that, I would be able to do what they're doing. And there's so much great stuff out there. And so you end up in this loop of seeing people using things, going and finding out about them, and then wanting those things as well. And in my case, I really haven't ever had that big a budget in order to buy music gear, but I could still plan, I could still research, and so I had not enough time, but I could spend a lot of that time researching and looking for kind of perfect studio setups, and a few times it's got quite out of hand. Watching gear reviews and comparisons on YouTube if I'm looking for stuff, because you want to get the best setup for your money, and you're looking at other people using different setups and you're trying to copy them, and you get caught in these loops of researching gear and looking for setups and perfect studios is a form of procrastination. You're spending all your time doing that and not really any time making music. And if you do start to buy lots of gear, then you've got too many options. You don't know where to start. And gear is hard to use, and I think shouldn't be taken on lightly. So while people have great studios with lots of gear and they use them really well to make really good music, they've invested a lot of time in those pieces of gear. And just because you own the same piece of gear doesn't mean you can do what they do. And I think most pieces of electronic music gear are quite hard to use and take a lot of investment in time to use well. So it's one thing getting hold of it, but it's quite another thing to make good music with it. So you've got to watch out for gear acquisition syndrome, or even researching gear. So gear researching syndrome. Gross. Gross. And the last thing I've just put in is health, because if you're not looking after yourself, if you're staying up too late doing all of this and you're not getting enough sleep, then you're not going to be in a good place to be creative. And there's a few things we're going to look at regards to health as well. So this is the initial kind of landscape that I've come up with for why you might be suffering from creative block. These types of states of mind that arise because of these types of habits. That's how it works for me anyway, is this kind of soup is what's happening for me normally when I'm hitting a creative block. So what can we do about it all? So I've come up with this first section, which I'm calling Groundwork. So these are all the things that might start to break this apart and open up your creative block. And it's pretty broad, but I think all of these things do play into putting yourself in a state of mind that is the most creative. And I think you've just got to do them. You've got to, if you want to be as creative as you can, then it's important to get all of this in place. Groundwork. So, first of all, I've come up with stop. I think if you are really struggling with starting work or getting very far with work, sometimes it's best just to stop for a while and to take some time off creating. I think it can be wise to do that. Just take a step back and to think about a slightly different way forward. Perhaps you need a clean slate. You could archive your work if you've been working on things for a long time and not getting anywhere with them, just so that you can start with something fresh and move forward with a different way of creating. I think it can be quite beneficial to take a bit of time off from what you have been doing. And the other stop is social media. So we were talking about social media being a difficult place if you are struggling with your own creativity. And so sometimes I think it's good to just come off social media for a bit. I do that quite regularly. Social media detox. In the past, I've just completely stopped using it for a while in order to just stop having that input of comparison and also to help with constantly looking and researching and wanting new gear all the time. Come off all of those platforms. So you just don't look at new gear. I think it can be very advisable to just remove those things if you can. Remove those inputs. Don't look at any new gear. Don't buy any new gear. In fact, maybe spend some time going through your existing gear and selling some of it and looking at what you've got. So that helps with researching and looking at gear, comparing yourself to other people. Come off those platforms and maybe have a bit of a breather from your work as well. So that is stop. Next in the groundwork area is rest. So you've stopped, you're already feeling better, but then rest just really means that you've got to look after yourself. It's really about this. It's about health. If you want to be creative, it's quite boring in some ways, but you've got to do all the normal things. You've got to sleep enough. You've got to look after yourself. You've got to eat well. You've got to exercise. All those normal things, rest. You need to have that in place if you want to be a creative person. The idea that you can push yourself to the limits and, not look after yourself and still be creative, I don't think really stands up to much scrutiny. It's something that I try to do. I try to look after myself and constantly fail. So, I like to get enough sleep, eat well, and then I like to go out for walks. Ideally, go out for a walk every day or some kind of cardio. And lift some weights as well, do some kind of weights. I think you need to look after yourself in order to be creative. And the final thing in the groundwork is go outside. Literally go outside, get under the sun as part of your exercise or whatever. But to go outside of, metaphorically, to go outside of what you're doing. I think you can become quite insular when you're being creative, so you can only be looking at very narrow things. And I don't think that's good for creativity. Having lots of varied inputs can be very useful. One of the things I do combines going outside with working, and that is field recording, which I found to be very helpful in that it does get me out of the studio and it does get me outside, but I'm also still working, so going and collecting sounds or recording in different places. So field recording works quite well for me as part of rest and going outside. But I also mean metaphorically going outside of music and art and, to have other inputs into your creative mind, other inputs. And I try to keep that quite broad still. Not only be listening to music and looking and watching other musicians, But, good movies, TV, books. I've got a couple of favourite creative books. So these are quite closely related to this whole process. So I'm getting outside of my own creativity, but I'm still looking at creativity. So this is one of my favourite books to do that. A lot of people like this book. I found it very useful. And this is The Creative Act, A Way of Being by Rick Rubin. A famous producer, produced lots of brilliant albums. And he has a very open and quite spiritual way of thinking about creativity. I think quite heavily inspired by mindfulness and Buddhism and Eastern philosophy. And he has fairly recently put this book together on the way he thinks about creativity. And it's all over the internet. There's hours of Rick Rubin on YouTube. And he's got a lot of good stuff to say. And I've found this book very useful. It's all about the way he sees creativity and the techniques that he uses to unlock that in situations and in people. And so this is one book that I find quite inspiring. If I'm feeling a little bit lost, then this can reset me in some ways. So it might be worth sitting down and reading this for half an hour in the evening. Might give me some kind of insight or way back into work. And another book that I like, which is similar, is this book is all about Richard Long, the artist Richard Long, who is an English artist who's been working since 1970s, 60s even, 60s, 70s. The majority of his work is about journeys and journeys that he takes in the real world, and then he documents those journeys in many ways. And sometimes he also makes sculptures from natural materials that are inspired by his journeys. And sometimes maybe it's just a poem or a list of words or a map or that documents the journey that he's taken in the real world. And I've always really liked his work. It's about other people writing about his work. So whether that be literature that's been made for exhibitions, like exhibition catalogues or promotional material, or whether it's articles in magazines or books, newspapers. This is all writing about Richard Long's work, but interestingly, I've found this quite useful as another way of thinking about creativity, because all these people writing in here are analysing Richard Long's work, which is very simple, and he doesn't tend to say that much about his work. And so their analysis of his work I found quite useful as a way of opening up ideas and thoughts about my own work. So Rick Rubin's book and this book about Richard Long are two books about creativity and creative practice that I find quite useful. So I'll often turn to these for other inputs. Or any books, not novels. I try to read a broad range of books, both fiction and non-fiction, and, watch good movies, TV, all sorts of things. Just make sure that I have other inputs coming into my mind and not to be too insular and only thinking about, things very closely related to what I'm doing. Go outside physically, go outside metaphorically. So that is the groundwork. You've maybe taken a bit of time off. You've come away from social media. You're looking after yourself. You're going outside and you're getting a lot of cultural inputs into your mind. This is the groundwork to help you to become unblocked. next part that I'm going to look at, now that you're in this great frame of mind and great place to be creative, I'm going to talk about some ideas to expand your creativity. So really we're looking at ways to generate new ideas, fresh ideas, moving forward, starting new things, ways of working that enable you to not get stuck and to not fall into any of these problems here. So the first area that I've come up with to look at is limits. So I think limits can be really good because they can work very much against having too many options. I think if you've got quite a lot of gear, I think it can just be hard to start sometimes because you've got so many options. And so I think there's a number of ways that you can limit things in order to enhance creative possibilities. And I think it works very well for me to have limited resources and setups. So I've got a couple of ideas for limiting things that have worked for me that I'm going to share here. So the first thing is limiting time. There's an online magazine called Fact, FACT, Fact Magazine. And for a long time, they had a series called Against the Clock, where they used to give producers, all sorts of producers, quite famous people sometimes, they give them a very limited time in order to produce something that was relatively finished, like a track that was relatively finished. So it was called Against the Clock. And I think it was 10 minutes that they got. And in that 10 minutes, they had to work really hard, focused, in order to produce something that was shareable or finished in some way in that time. And I think that works quite well. If you can limit yourself, and some of the other ideas that I've used will play back into this idea of limits as well. We'll talk about those in a bit. So limiting your time and seeing if you can, in a limited time, produce something that you can share. So you could say that was every day I will finish something. You have to let go of perfectionism, but by finishing something every day or finishing something in 10 minutes, you're repeating and you're letting things go. And all of those things that enable you to just go, okay, let's go again, like quantity over quality, which I think is very important when you're starting out. I think quantity over quality is the way to go. Just keep doing stuff and not getting stuck, bogged down in details, in editing. Just keep doing stuff, finishing it, somehow doing something with it, go again. So I think time limits can help with that kind of loop. Against the Clock, still all up there, so you can go and look at what all different types of producers, how they've managed with their 10 minutes. It's a good series. I'll put a link down in the description. The other way of limiting is gear. So limit the gear with the idea of minimal setups, working with very minimal amounts of gear, or, whatever that is for you, whatever works for you. It could be that you just work with a single thing, or smaller setups, not all your gear all the time. I think when I look at some people's studios and the amount of equipment that they have, it just fills me with dread. I would have to put it all away. I tend to do that. I don't tend to have all of my music equipment out at any one time. I like to keep it all away and then get specific things out. So, if I'm working with the modular, I've just got the modular out and link it up to the computer and everything else is away. Or I might just be working with my loop pedal, or just working with the Microfreak. I like small setups and I like the focus that gives me, and I don't think I would like to have all of my gear out all the time. I think it's can be quite distracting, and I would advise, if you do have a lot of gear, to get a really good cupboard and put most of it away and just get out select setups that you can focus on and work with. It's going to help you with option paralysis, and it's going to be more fun. I mean, you need things that are playable. If you're working with hardware, you can't too much hardware. You're going to be all over the place. Just try and work with smaller setups. And I think really, if you do have a lot of gear, you need to perhaps really think that through carefully, because electronic music gear these days, they are normally quite complex and quite deep machines that need a lot of time invested in them in order to be able to work well with them. It's easy to underestimate the amount of time you need to spend with gear in order to get good at using it. So I would advise you to think hard about whether you want to invest that amount of time in all of those different boxes if you have a lot of gear. You could even try putting gear away for a while. A technique that people use is to not sell it. They don't want to sell it, but perhaps you could just box it up. Put quite a lot of your gear away for a period of time and see how that goes. And if you are really missing that drum machine or synth or whatever it is, then you can get it out again. But if you, in 6 months' time, in a year's time, you haven't thought about it that much and you haven't got it out of its box again, then maybe you could afford to let that go, and maybe it's not something you want to invest your time in. So I think minimal setups and maybe putting gear away for periods of time can be very helpful to stop this and for you to learn gear better. And as you get to know it better, you're going to enjoy using it more. Minimal setups and limit your time. I'm sure there's lots of other types of limits you can put on your work. Limiting things does work very well, but there are a couple that I've come up with, a couple of ideas. So the next section that I've come up with as things to help with your creativity is challenges. So I think you can challenge yourself in various ways here. And what I really mean by this is people, when they set, I think the first monthly challenge was probably Inktober, where artists set themselves a challenge of drawing something every day and sharing it. I think people came up with lists of words and subjects for each day. And in music, I think the most famous monthly challenge is probably January. So in the month of January, every day you make a piece of music, possibly a live jam of some kind, and then you share it somewhere on social media. And so I tried this for the first time last year in 2023, and it worked really well. It's hard to produce something that you want to share every day because you're doing January and everyone's in the same boat, and it is hard to do. I think it helps you to let go of that perfectionism. I think it very much works as an antidote to not having enough time. It's like a limit. It's a type of limit in that you've got a time limit. You've got one day to produce something and share it. And I found when I did it last year, there was quite a good sense of community around it. And, people who have managed to get further and further into the month, it's like, there's some good community. On Instagram, there was good community around it. And it was a positive and enjoyable experience to do January last year. And it did push me to find ways of working that were quite quick and that I could come up with work perhaps quicker than normal. And it was kind of the good side of social media, that community side. So January, some people call it Dronenuary, if drones are your thing. And there's all sorts now. There's I've previously done Noisevember. There's Beattober. So there's plenty of these monthly things, monthly challenges that are social challenges. Lots of people get involved in. And obviously, you don't have to limit yourself to these very specific monthly challenges. You could just challenge yourself at any point by making your own challenge. So for the next 30 days, I'm going to finish something. Whatever it may be, you can create your own challenges, or you can do these slightly more organised monthly challenges. I think it can be really helpful and a lot of fun. So the last section that I've got for expanding your creativity and generating ideas is prompts. So what do I mean by this? So what I really mean is prompt cards. So quite a few years ago, I actually got myself a set of these oblique strategies, and these are artist prompt cards for when you're feeling a creative block in the studio. You can use these prompt cards in order to unlock some new direction in your creativity. And these were created by Brian Eno and Peter Schmidt in the 1970s originally, and they've come out in multiple different editions since then. They're all slightly different, and the idea is that you're in the studio and you don't know what to do, you're a bit stuck, and so you pull out your oblique strategies and you turn over a card and it says, oh, that's the title, over 100 worthwhile dilemmas. So you pull out a card and it says, emphasize the flaws. Use an old idea. So I liked the idea of these cards prompting you to go off in a new direction. And sometimes they work and they can inspire you to think in a different way. So like use an old idea. That probably is quite helpful if you can think of an old idea or if something pops into your mind. But if something doesn't pop into your mind and you can't think of an old idea, then perhaps that just gives you another problem. And I found that with oblique strategies. I liked the concept of them, that they could move me forward with my creative thinking. But often I would find them quite wordy and quite hard to understand and would tend to give me another problem to solve. Do something boring. Then I would be thinking about what's boring, and then like what the vacuuming, and then how does the vacuuming relate to my work? And sometimes they wouldn't often work for me. And the other thing is there is 100 cards or so, and because they're all just a single card, then if you start to use them quite a lot, then you'll see cards over and over again, and you'll think, oh no, it's that card again, I hate that card. So they didn't work well for me. I'd be interested to know how often Brian Eno actually used these in the studio with artists. Say Coldplay or U2 or David Bowie. Did he ever get out the oblique strategy cards in order to get them out of a tight creative spot? So I liked the idea of oblique strategies. Who should be doing this job? How would they do it? See, that really doesn't help me at all, and I don't know what to do with that. And so I decided that I would take the concept of prompt cards and make my own set of cards that I found slightly more helpful. There are quite a lot of decks of creative cards that you can get. But they all tend to suffer from, I think, the same problems as oblique strategies, in that they're quite often quite complex. The cards have either a lot of writing on them, or writing and pictures, all sorts of different things that I think are quite, for me anyway, quite hard to move forward with, because they're like, make an exhaustive list of everything you might do and do the last thing on the list. I'm not going to do that. I'm just not going to do that. That's not going to work for me. So I came up with these that I call pivot cards. They're a similar concept in that they're prompt cards, but you use them in a different way, and they're kind of made in a very different way. So each card just has one word on it. So sound. And the way that I came up with using them is that each card has a word that is related to sound in some kind of way, and that you draw more than one card. So I tend to draw them one at a time, and then when something interesting comes up in the combination of words, then I'll use that. And I'll take cards away if I don't like them, and I'll just use them in that kind of way. There's 100 cards, but it's the combination of words that means that there is an endless variety of very simple prompts to help you with your creativity. And I find this simple combination of words is much easier to work with as a creative prompt. So tone, volume, you could do something with that. Tone, volume, dissonance, dissonant tone. I would probably go with dissonant tone. I could probably start thinking about dissonant tone and coming up with something like that. Hold. Mechanical, loud. Mechanical, loud. Hold, loud. Loud, atonal. Loud, atonal. Okay, modulate, atonal. I could work with that. You know, it gives you, I think, for me, these cards give you a kind of more abstract kind of point in, where you're not thinking about concepts so much as actual physical possibilities. So it takes you out of that creative thought and into a more kind of more physical kind of sense of the sound. So it gives you almost like a scientific kind of job to do. And for me, that works a lot better. So these are my pivot cards. Modulate, atonal. And yeah, I've been making these for a few years. I sell them on Bandcamp, and what they're doing is they're adding a random element into your creative process. That's what Oblique Strategy is trying to do. It's trying to push you into, it's trying to give you a random input in that makes your creative thinking like come alive. And that's all I'm trying to do with these. It just gives you a new path to follow, adds a random element in, which is something that people have used in music for many years. Famously, John Cage used to work with the I Ching to add random elements into his work. Lots of artists have done that over the years, and that's all my pivot cards do. But they work well for me. There's 100 words in here related to sound, and the combinations, as I say, there's thousands of combinations. And I might use them in combination. If I'm doing something like January to come up with ideas each day, I might use my pivot cards. So this is the kind of system that I use, limiting things, doing challenges, setting myself challenges, and then using my prompt cards. These pivot cards I sell on Bandcamp from my Bandcamp page. You can buy your own box if you think these might help you. I've made a PDF version of the pivot cards just for this video, which I'll share the link down in the description. And in a minute, I'll show you exactly what that is and how you can make your own set of mini pivot cards from the PDF. We'll do that in a second. Just to recap, my kind of method for getting out of creative block is to, stop, take some time off if you need from working or social media, rest, look after yourself, make sure you're getting your exercise and your sleep, go outside. So you literally go outside with your field recording, or, go outside of your creative process, with creative books, other books, other inputs into your mind, and then boost your creativity by setting yourself limits, time limits, and minimal setups, gear setups. Join some challenges like January or Beattober, and then get yourself a box of pivot cards. That's my kind of system for beating creative block. Hopefully that's of some use to some of you. You can find all my music and field recordings on Bandcamp, and my writing and other field recordings and all sorts of things about the way I work on my studio journal at Substack. So Bandcamp and Substack. So I hope that's been of help, of use. If you've got your own ideas about, how you break out of creative block, then please share them in the comments. And I'm going to make the mini pivot cards now, and then I'll see you in the next one. Mini pivot cards. So if you go to my Substack site, there's a link down below in the description. You can get yourself this PDF, which is a mini version of, and the last page here describes it. Thank you for downloading mini pivot cards, creative prompts for musicians. And now I'm going to make these.